All right, so welcome back. We are in module two, right? Today's focus is Amazon EC2, right? Now, I hope after yesterday's session that most of you, right, if not all, have created your free tier AWS account, right? So the basic account is what you should create, and I hope you have done that because you need that account when we practice the demonstrations of the labs that we're going to see today, right? Okay, so our goal this week is to get you started uh, with AWS, right? And what we mean is to get you started with EC2, right? EC2 is the virtual uh, server service, right? And this is the easiest way to get started with cloud. And it's also, EC2 is needed by all kinds of applications, right? So it's a good service to get started with. All right, let me just make this full screen here. All right, so once again, just looking at the course, the overall course, the curriculum once again. So we have 10 modules, right? And this week we're looking at AWS, an introduction to AWS cloud computing, and also we're looking at EC2, right? And then next week we'll look at some other infrastructural categories. So this week we're looking at compute, specifically EC2. Next week we look at storage, right? So all applications need compute and they need storage, right? So we look at services like S3, EBS, Glacier, etc. And next week we'll also look at networking, and specifically we look at virtual private cloud. Right now, let me just warn you in advance that VPC is a very difficult topic. Right, based on my experience with all these batches, I find that people struggle with this particular topic, right? VPCs, because most of us come from, say, system admin background or database administration, more on the application side, right? So networking is something that most of us are not familiar with. So people find this topic very difficult, right? So maybe you should do a little bit of reading up on VPCs, especially before next week's class. All right. Okay. So this is where we are today. Our focus is on EC2, Elastic Cloud Compute. Now we've already seen yesterday, right? We have seen instance types, right? We've already introduced EC2. We've talked about the various instance types, right? General purpose, compute optimized, memory optimized, etc. And we've also seen that within each type, right, you have various sizes. So you have nano servers, you have 4x large servers, 10x large servers, right? So there's a whole range of server sizes within each category, right? And yesterday we also we also discussed a little bit the purchasing options, right? So you have on-demand instances, reserved instances, spot instances, right? On-demand is the most common, right? You normally use on-demand for test environments, development environments, proof of concept type of activities. And if you need a server for a long time, right, that's when you consider using reserved instances, right? Now, spot instances is a different category. It's a it's a category which is used for batch jobs, especially those that can where you can wait for servers to become available, and also especially jobs where interruption is acceptable, right? So spot instances have a narrower use case, right, compared to on-demand and reserved instances. Right. Okay. Now, before that, we also looked at the global infrastructure. We spoke about regions, availability zones. We spoke about edge locations, right? And we also saw how to choose a region based on things like pricing, legal aspects, latency, etc. Right. So this is what we've done yesterday. Now we are ready to move forward with EC2. All right, and my apologies for this. Sometimes I have to sort of exit this full screen and come back in. All right. Anyways, so today, right? This is module 2, and these are the objectives of module 2. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you some demonstrations around EC2. How do we launch an EC2 instance? We look at Linux servers. We look at Windows servers. We'll see how to connect to these as well, right? How do you connect to a Linux server? How do you connect to a Windows server so that you can, perform some activities on these servers? And then I will show you an example of deploying an application on the server. So I'll show you how to install WordPress, which is a popular content management system, popular blog system, right? It's a PHP application. So I'm going to show you how to set up WordPress on a Linux, Ubuntu Linux server, right? So, this class, obviously, we're not learning WordPress, right? But the idea is to help, to explain to you how EC2 works, how do you connect to it, how do you install software on it, right? And then how do you access the application, right? So there's lots of things to learn in this process of deploying WordPress on EC2. Right, so that's what we're going to do. Now, we also need to understand, before we can do all of this, we need to understand some concepts. Amazon machine image, for example, right? This is the image that can be used. It's very much like VM images, right? So you can basically use any type of image to create your server, right? So before you create your server, you need to specify what is the image that we are going to use to launch this server, right? So the image basically consists of, it's a template, right? An image is a template, and you're essentially selecting, do you want a Windows server? Do you want an Ubuntu server? Right? So when you say I'm using an Ubuntu Army, right? You're using an Ubuntu image to launch a server. What will happen at the end of the launch is that you'll have a server with Ubuntu installed on it, right? So that's what an image is. The Amazon machine image, in short, it's called ARMY, right? So an ARMY is the first step in creating your server, right? And it basically describes what software will be installed on the server when it comes up, right? So you can have operating systems like Linux flavors, Debian, Ubuntu, Red Hat, different kinds of Windows servers as well. And it's not just for operating system. The ARMY can contain any software, the operating system, plus some system packages. For example, you may want to have Apache web server, you may want to have MySQL database, PHP, right? And it can also contain your application, right? So the image can contain your application, so that when you launch a server with that image, your application is fully installed, fully configured, and you just have to start using that server or that application, right? You can the ARMY can also contain third-party products, right? So these are commercial products. Anything, any popular product you can take, let's say Oracle database, WebSphere, application server, Tableau analytics software, right? All these commercial products are also available as ARMYs within AWS, right? So you just have to select an ARMY and use that to launch your server, and then the server will have all that software pre-installed. So you can just right away, you can just connect to the server and start using that software, right? So that's what an ARMY is. We'll look at this more, and then we'll also have to look at security groups. These are basically firewalls. So each server that you set up in AWS has to have a security group, and this is a firewall using which you can control, what kinds of access are allowed into the server. Right? Maybe you want HTTP ports to be open. Maybe you want SSH ports to be open. So those things are defined in security groups, right? We also use key pairs for connecting to the servers, right? Key pairs are more common in the Unix and Linux world, right? Less so in the Windows world, but these are basically ways for the user to be authenticated, right? So you have a private and public key pair, and that has to be used to connect to the servers. This is a great way, by the way. Key pairs are much better than passwords, right, as a security mechanism. So this is what these are some security aspects of launching your EC2 instance, right? We also have to discuss IP addressing. So there are, when you launch an EC2 instance, there are 2 or 3 types of, well, actually there are exactly 3 types of IP addresses. There's public IP, there's private IP, and there's elastic IP address. Right? So we need to understand what these IP addresses are, which ones to use when, right? So that's something we'll talk about, and then we'll, and then I'm going to show you a lot of demonstrations. Maybe we'll touch upon other things such as ENI, tenancy, etc. All right. Okay. Now we also have a class project, right, which we looked at briefly yesterday, where the project is to essentially create a web application on using EC2, autoscaling, RTS, etc. Right. So in this session, in this module, right, I'm going to show you these demonstrations, and you should be in a position to do one bit of that project, which is to install, to launch an EC2 instance, right? And on this instance, you'll be setting up your application, right? So we'll have that part of the project hopefully completed with this module. All right. So this is the these are the objectives of this today's session. All right. So now let's get started with how do we select the machine image, Amazon machine image. In short, it's called AMI, right? It's called AMI. All right. So it's basically, these are templates. The template can include information about what is the operating system that has to be used for the server, and also on top of the operating system, what are the various software packages or applications, configurations, right? All of that can be baked into an AMI, and once you have an image, you can use that image to create as many servers as you want. Right, so there's no need to sort of in the physical world before cloud, right? You bought a server, maybe it came with an operating system, and then you had to build your server from scratch, right? You would install all the software packages, you can install your application, configure everything, right? That's how things were done earlier, and now with VM, right? VM, and as well as in the cloud, you simply use images, right? So the installation process doesn't have to be repeated. Once an image is ready, it can be reused many times over. All right. Okay. Now the images, when you launch a EC2 instance, the first step is to select the AMI, right? And there are many AMIs available from AWS. So you have community AMIs, for example, Ubuntu servers, Debian, Red Hat. Red Hat is commercial, right? Red Hat is a commercial product. Windows servers are available as well. And then there's something called the AWS Marketplace, where commercial vendors can create AMIs with their product baked into that AMI, right? So you can select any sort of AMI from the AWS Marketplace to launch your EC2 instance, right? So the whole range of AMIs that are available, right? You have to you just have to pick what is the software or operating system that you want to use. All right, so that's basically AMI, and here are some examples. So let's say if you want to have if you want to use Hadoop, right? If you want to use Hadoop, then all you have to do is select the AMI which has this Hadoop software on it, right? So any sort of software that you want, you can basically select the AMI for that software, and once the EC2 instance comes up, you'll have that software up and running on that server, right? So these are just some examples, right? So these are probably some commercial vendors, Oracle being a prominent one here, right? Trend Micro as well. So any sort of commercial product, right, will have an AMI in the AWS Marketplace. You can just select that and set up a server, right? Now the software cost will be built into the cost of the EC2 instance, right? So there's no separate licensing the way it used to happen in the past. So, so the hourly EC2 instance price includes the cost of software. All right, okay. Okay, let's take a look at this, right? Let's take a look at this. I'm going to show you how to do this on this web console, right? So this is my AWS account. If you have created your free tier account, you'll see something similar, right? You'll see exactly the same thing actually. And what we'll do is we'll go into EC2. This is the first option under the compute category, right? Let me just go into this EC2 management console, and let me also point out a few things here, right? First of all, we are I'm going to use this region, US East. This is North Virginia, and this is also called the standard region. Maybe this was the first region that came up, right? And what tends to happen is this is a good region to use when you're learning AWS, because some of the latest features, the latest services are available in this region, right? And what I do is I do use other regions. So, for example, my production servers are in Singapore right now, and I always use US East for training purposes, so that I keep my training servers completely separate from my production servers, right? Because sometimes you can make a mistake, right? I may want to terminate a server, and then I may accidentally terminate a server in the other production region, right? So it's best to sort of separate, to use different regions for training purposes, for test purposes, for production purposes, right? Yeah. So this is the first point. The second point is you will see in this region, right? In this region, you can see that there are 4 availability zones at this time, right? So there's 1A, 1C, 1B is missing. Maybe it's under maintenance or something. And there's 1A, 1C, 1D, and 1E, right? So there are 4 availability zones. This is a large region, so that's why it has 4. Some of the smaller regions, like Singapore or Mumbai, will have 2 availability zones, right? Okay. Now, there are many things to explore, right? We'll do that in due course, but let's get started. So I'm going to click on this button here called Launch Instance, right? And when you do that, you can see here the first step. The first step is to select, is to choose an army, right? Choose an army, and you can see in the Quick Start menu you have some of the more commonly used operating systems. So there's Red Hat, there's Ubuntu, there's Microsoft Windows Server as well, right? And then different flavors of Windows. There's one with SQL Server, right? And then there are others as well, right? So this is basically the Quick Start option. But you can also look at some community armies. These are open source products. So, for example, you have Ubuntu here. Once again, I'm not sure why Windows is included, but there's many open source Linux options. For example, Debian here, right? You also have Fedora, Ubuntu, of course, and CentOS. So these are community armies, in the sense these are mainly open source armies, right? And in addition, you can also look at the AWS marketplace, right? This is the place where commercial vendors can create armies with their product, right? You can see here, right here, there are some. These are featured products. So this is company called MarkLogic, something around big data, I think, right? TIBCO, middleware company, right? And there are many more. So you can see here, application development, 400 products, application servers, 500 products, right? So all the major commercial products will probably be available here, right? So for example, you can search for, say, if you want an Oracle server, I'm sure there'll be some Oracle products here, right? If you want, let's say, WebSphere, this is an IBM product, right? So you can find WebSphere MQ version 8, right? So you can search for any commercial product here, and you should find it. You should find it in this in the AWS marketplace, right? Okay. Now, so we've looked at some quick start options, which are basically Linux and Windows servers. We've looked at some community armies, which are open source armies that are available. We've looked at AWS Marketplace, where commercial products are available, right? And then one more option, which is My Armies, right? So here is where you can create your own armies. Right? In fact, most of us, right? You eventually have to create your own armies, because let's say you have some web applications, right? So what you'll do is you'll create a server, maybe using Ubuntu or Windows or whatever. You'll deploy your application on that server, and then from that server you will create an army of your own, right? And this army will have not just Windows or Ubuntu, but it will also have your application deployed on it, right? And once you have your own army, you can use that army to create as many servers as you want, right? So that's something you'll have to do, right? Everybody has to have their own armies because it simplifies administration to a great deal. And then also the same armies will be used in things like auto-scaling groups, where a whole fleet of servers, right? You can even have 100 servers, 500 servers, right? A whole fleet of servers can be created from a single image, right? A single army, right? Okay. So yeah, so that's what an army is. Let's look at some more slides, right? I'll keep stopping at appropriate times, and I'll show you these demonstrations, right? So right now we've looked at what an army is. Let's look at some of the other stuff that we need to understand. Okay, so next we'll talk about security groups, right? So whenever you launch an EC2 instance, it is mandatory to specify a security group. And a security group is nothing but a firewall, right? It's a firewall. And you can control incoming and outgoing. Mainly the focus is on incoming, right? Outgoing is something you can look at, but mainly you want to protect your server from attacks from the outside, from the internet, right? So you want to block the incoming traffic more than the outgoing traffic, right? So what you do is you set up some rules where you can say, look, SSH access is allowed from certain IP addresses, right? So SSH is the protocol, the port used is 22, right? So you need to specify the port, you need to specify the protocol, whether it's TCP or UDP, and then you need to specify the source IP addresses that are allowed to access this server, right? So let's take a look at some sample rules here, right? So for example, you can create a security group which has this kind of rule, where we have SSH, which is TCP protocol port 22, and what we're saying is you're allowing connections over SSH to this EC2 instance from this source IP address, right? So 0000/0 simply means any IP address, right? So what we're saying is anybody in the world can connect to this server over port 22, right? Actually, this is not a great example. You should never do this, right? You should never have a source IP set to anywhere for SSH. That would be a big mistake, right? So I should get this slide changed, but the point is servers on the cloud, right? They are vulnerable, and you have to be careful with your security group settings, because if you're not disciplined, right, and if you create a rule like this, then you can bet that your server will be attacked, right? And I know this from first-hand experience, right? So there are lots of people who are doing who have all kinds of motivations. Maybe they want to take control of your server for spamming purposes. Maybe they want to launch a denial of service attack. Maybe they're after your data, right? Especially if you're a larger company. So there's lots of attacks that actually happen all the time, right? So you need to be very disciplined with your security group settings, and this kind of rule is a bad idea, right? We'll see what to do, but I'm just trying to point out, how a security group is set up, and what kind of rules you can create. Okay, you can also create multiple rules, of course, right? So you can also create a second rule, a third rule, a fourth rule. In this case, in the picture, you can see that the second rule is for port 80, HTTP port. This is the standard HTTP port, which means maybe this server is a web server. So your users will connect to this web server over port 80 from their browsers, right? So you need to allow that. You need to allow that. So that's why anybody in the world, right? 0000/0 simply means any server in the world can connect to your application over port 80, and this is usually fine because you want your website or web application to be available from anywhere in the world, right? But these are the kinds of rules you need to set up when it comes to security groups. All right, so let me show this to you, right? Let me show this to you. So here, what we're going to do is we'll select maybe we'll select Ubuntu. Right? We'll select Ubuntu here. In fact, this is a new version of Ubuntu. I prefer an older version, right? Let me see if that's still available. That is called Trusty, Ubuntu Trusty. Let's see if it's available. Yeah, so it is, right? So I can use an older version because I know that certain applications work on this one. I haven't really tested those applications on the newer Ubuntu version. Okay, so after selecting the army, you select the instance type, right? And this will be familiar to you because we had discussed this yesterday, right? So these are general purpose servers, and you can see various sizes are available. So you have a nano, micro, small, medium, large, right? So all these are various sizes that are available. You have to, based on your understanding of your application, you have to choose the right size, right? Look at this, please make sure that you're aware of this label here, free tier eligible, right? This green label here. So the only instance type which is free tier eligible is micro. Right? So not even nano, it's only micro. So make sure that you use micro so that you are under the free tier eligibility, right? So you'll not get a bill if you use this particular server, right? But otherwise, you can see the whole range of options, right? Compute optimized, you have different sizes under compute optimized, you have different sizes under memory optimized. All those options that we looked at yesterday are available. You can select whatever you like, right? And also remember, you can always change these things. In cloud computing, you don't have to do too much of planning, right? The way it used to be in the past, because in the past, things were very inflexible, right? It was very hard to change things once you had placed an order or once the shipment had arrived, right? It was very hard to change things. But here, change is very easy. So planning, forecasting, planning in advance, all those things become less important. Right? You can choose whatever you think is right. If you don't like it, you can, or if it doesn't work for you, you can always change the instance type. All right. Let me skip this bit, right? We'll discuss this page subsequently, but let me skip this for the moment. We'll just go with the default settings here. This is, by the way, storage, right? So this is the storage that is available with your server, with your EC2 instance. This is what is called an EBS volume, right? EBS is Elastic Block Store. We'll discuss this next week when we talk about storage options, right? But what's happening here is you have the server will have one EBS volume. This is the root volume, which means this will have the operating system, and the size of this volume is about 8 GB, right? So we'll discuss this later. Next, let me talk about the security group, right? That's what we are discussing in the slides. So this is our security group here, right? You can create a new group, or you can use an existing one. Normally, what we do is if you have web servers, right? We have 10 web servers. All the 10 web servers will use the same security group, right? So you don't have to create a group, a security group every time you launch an EC2 instance. Right? Often, when you launch an EC2 instance, you'll use an existing security group, right? So, that's important. You don't have to create hundreds of security groups. Just create a few based on what type of server it is. right? So a web server will have a web server security group, an app server will have an app server security group, a database server will have a database security group, right? And then you just reuse these security groups. You don't have to create them whenever you launch a new server. All right, but right now we'll create a new one, right? Let's say, let's call it my app web server security group, right? Let's assume that this is a web server. So, so I'm going to create a web server security group here, right? You can give it a good description. You can say my app SG for web server tier, right? Something like this. So that later it's easy to identify what this security group is for. All right, and here you can see there are, there's one default rule available here, right? And this is SSH and TCP protocol port 22 and anywhere. It says anywhere, right? So this, I really think AWS should change this. They should not do this because this is a bad idea, right? What you should do is you can have either this one, right? Only my IP address, which means the IP address of my internet connection here at home will be allowed to connect to the server, right? Not anywhere. This is a bad idea because then I leave the server open to attack from anywhere in the world, right? So this is better. This is better. Or you can also set custom, which means you can create. You can specify a range of IP addresses, perhaps the IP address range of your corporate network, right? So this is also a good idea. But right now I'm going to use my IP address. This is the only rule that you have at the moment, right? Okay. So this is how you set up the security group. If you like, you can also add more rules. For example, you can say this is going to be a web server, so we need to allow access on port 80 HTTP protocol, and for this port and protocol, right, anywhere is fine. This is fine because you want people anywhere in the world to connect to your application, right? So this is fine, but you shouldn't have anywhere with port 22. That would be too dangerous. Right? Okay, you can create as many rules as you want. Maybe you need something for HTTPS as well, right? So these are common HTTP rules. Port 80, port 443 is a common. This is a common configuration for a web server. All right. Okay. So this is the security group. Now let's look at some other stuff as well. Okay. Now, before once the EC2 instance comes up, right, you need to connect to it via SSH to maybe install some software, deploy your application, etc. Right? Now, how will the user be authenticated? Right? How do we control the access to the server? And in the Linux world, right, we use what is called a key pair. Right? We use a key pair, and what this is it's basically a pair. Right? It's a pair. There's always a pair, right? And one key is the private key, and the other one is the public key, right? And this is standard cryptographic mechanisms for authentication going back many decades. Very, very powerful, very strong, virtually unbreakable. Much better than passwords, right? Much better than passwords, because the problem with passwords is that they're hard to remember. So people tend to make the passwords simple, right? They have maybe spouses' names, kids' names, things like 1, 2, 3, 4, ABCD, right? These are there are common patterns that people try to enter into their passwords because they are hard to remember. Right, so passwords are known to be a bad idea. Right, we are stuck with this bad idea for so long, but we all agree that passwords are a bad idea. Right, but this key pairs are much better. Key pairs are much better. And on the Linux side, on Unix side, key pairs are common. On Windows, not so much. Right, mainly because Windows came from a consumer side, right? Their history is that they were mainly consumer products, where convenience, ease of use is important, whereas Unix and Linux came from the academic world, where security was considered more important, right? Okay, but basically, what we're going to do is we use key pairs to connect to these servers. And the way this works is there's a public key, private key. The public key is installed on the server, right? And the private key has to be with the user, right? And the private key is not kept anywhere on the server. AWS does not keep your private key, right? So if you lose your private key, you lose access to the server, and there's no way for you to get in. There's no way that you can get in. There is no backdoor entry, right? So you have to keep the private key safely, and it is by design not kept on the server for so that there's no attack, right? If you start keeping private keys on the server, then it becomes a place where people can attack. So private keys have to be distributed to the user. All right. Okay. Now let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at how this private key really works. And what you do here, we are launching a server, right? So we're almost there. We have selected the army, we've selected the instance type, we've looked at the storage, right? And now we've looked at the security group as well. And this is the review page, right? Before launching, you just review what kind of server you are setting up. So here, what we're doing is we have an Ubuntu server, we have one EBS volume, we have this security group, right? And we have this is a micro instance. I'm sorry. So this is a micro instance that we are using, right? So now, when you click on launch, right, there's one more screen that comes up, and this is where you specify the key pair, right? You can choose an existing key pair, or you can create a new one. So normally, the way this works is each user in your team will have their own key pair, right? And once a user has one key pair, the same key pair can be used to connect to any server, right? So you don't want to create too many keys per user, right? However, each user must have their own key pair, right? So you don't want to share key pairs. You should never ever share the private key with anybody else, right? It's the same as passwords. Never share your private key with anybody else. Each user must have their own account, must have their own key pair, right? However, once a user has a key pair, right, the same key pair should be used on multiple servers, right? So it's actually quite easy to use if you implement, quite easy and secure, right, if you implement all this properly. All right, so for now, I'm going to use an existing key pair, right? Later, I'll show you how to create a key pair. For the moment, we'll use an existing key pair. All right, so now I've clicked on launch instance, and that's it. It's coming up, right? If you click on this server here, you can see that the server is coming up. It's in a pending state. In a matter of seconds, it will be in a running state, and then you are ready to connect to this server, right? So this is this is the on-demand nature of cloud, right? When you need some servers, you can just click on launch instance, go through a few screens, and at the end of it, you have a server available to you right away, right? So there's no waiting. It's completely self-service, right? So you don't have to talk to anybody, right? So this is why cloud is great, right? This was not possible earlier, right? This was not possible earlier. All right. So I have a timeout, right? So this times out once a day approximately. Let me just log in here. Now you may not see this page, right? You may not see this page. That's because on my account I've turned on multi-factor authentication, right? We'll talk about this at a later stage. It's a good idea to have multi-factor authentication on your AWS account. All right. So what we have here is, you can see the server is up and running, right? It's in a running state, which means we can now connect to this. Server, right? So what you can do, for example, is you can basically take this public IP address. You have to use the public IP address because if you use the private IP address, there's also another one called private IP address, right? So this is internal. This is internal to AWS. If you try to connect using the private IP, then the internet does not know how to reach the private IP address, right? So that's why you have to use the public IP address when you want to connect to this server. So the way you connect to the server is I'm going to use the terminal program, right? So this is a MacBook. So on on a Mac, you use the terminal program. On Linux as well, you can use a terminal window like this one. And on if you have a Windows laptop or computer, right, you can use an SSH client, and the most popular one is called PuTTY, right? PuTTY. So you have to use PuTTY to connect to the server, but the principles are the same. So what you do is when you want to connect, you say something like this, right? So you say SSH and then -i and then specify the private key, right? This is the private key that you are using to connect to the server, and then you specify the username of this server. Now this server is an Ubuntu server, and it has a default user called Ubuntu, right? So this is something that you learn over time. If you use a Windows server, then the default user is called administrator, right? If you use the Amazon Linux Army, then the default user is EC2-user, right? So if you do a Google for these things, you'll find what the default user is for the particular army that you are using, right? So for an Ubuntu machine, the default user is Ubuntu, and then you can specify the public IP address, right? So you say SSH -i, the private key, the username, the default username, @ the public IP address, right? This is how you connect to the server, right? And this is how you connect to a Linux server, and here we are, right? So this is we are already connected, right? You can see this is the Ubuntu machine here. Right now, I'm typing commands on the Ubuntu server, right? So you can run your Linux commands, something like ls pwd, which tells you which directory you are currently in. You can run who am I, which tells you what is the user that is currently logged in here, right? You can run all kinds of commands. All these standard, the stuff that you need to run on a Linux machine can now be run because you are connected to the Ubuntu server. All right. Okay. Let me exit, and when I exit, I'm back out into my own computer, right? So right now I'm on my computer, right? So this is how you do it, and what we've seen in the slides as well as the demo so far is to launch an EC2 instance. First of all, you need to be in a region, right? You need to be in a specific region. The region selection is something we discussed yesterday, right? It's a very important topic. You need to select your region carefully based on pricing, legal considerations, latency, etc. Right? Right now, I'm in this North Virginia region. As you can see, you can select any of the other regions as well, right? And then to launch an EC2 instance, what you do is you use the launch instance button, right? And then the first thing you do is select an army, right? The army specifies what OS you're using, what software maybe you're using on top of the OS, all right? Then you specify the instance type, nano, micro, large, whatever. Then you specify the security group, right? Be very careful with the security group, especially sensitive ports like port 22, right? And then we also specify the key pair that we'll be using to connect to the server, right? Once the server comes up, you can use the public IP address to connect to the server using an SSH client, right? On a Mac, you can use the terminal window. On Windows, you'll have to use PuTTY, which is an SSH client to connect to the server. All right. Okay. So yeah. So this was the first step here. Now let me just skip some of these things. We'll do a little bit of quiz here, but before that, let me stop here. Let me see if you have any questions on what we've seen so far today. Right, so we'll use our Google spreadsheet that we used yesterday. We'll use the same document throughout this course, right? So if you don't have this link, please let me know. I can share it with you. All right, so feel free, right? Please feel free to write your questions, right? You know, I think it's you should take this upon yourself, right? You should make sure that whatever is not clear, you sort of ask, right, and get that cleared up while we are in this session, right? But also afterwards as well, right? Feel free to enter your questions even after the class. We'll cover all the questions at some point in this course. All right, let me start with Ratish's question here. Okay, so what you're saying is, if I create an army, do I get charged for creating the army, right? And you've not created an EC2 instance, you've only created an army. Is there a charge? Is there a cost to creating an army? So the answer is yes. There is a cost, because an army is actually backed by an EBS snapshot. EBS is your volume, right? And an EBS snapshot is a copy of your EBS of that EBS volume. So so an army actually uses up some amount of storage, right? So you're charged for that storage, right? So you have to basically pay for that storage. You have to pay for the storage. You don't have to pay for the EC2 instance right? And also, let me tell you, storage costs are very, very small, right? Storage costs are very low, and probably falling all the time. Right? So it's a good idea actually, right? When you say that I just have an image, I don't have a server, that's how it should be, right? So never remember that compute, right? Compute infrastructure is way more expensive than storage, right? This is the general principle. So therefore, it's a very good idea. To have armies, right? So you can create servers whenever you want, and not to have any idle EC2 instances, right? There's no reason in the cloud world, right? There's no reason to have anything idle, running, right? Just terminate anything that is idle, and you can do it safely because you have armies and EBS snapshots. So all the data is safe, all the software is safe, right? Just create an army so that you can recreate the server when you need to. Don't keep any server running if you're not really using it, right? So what you say is actually a very good idea, right? But there is a bit of a cost, which is only storage cost. All right, okay. Greg, as a home user, I don't have a static IP address. How does AWS handle it if my ISP gives me a different address? Yeah, this is a good question, right? And I think what you're referring to is the security group, right? So if you look at this server here, and if you look at the security group for this server, right? And this is the rules that we had set up here, right? So we had said HTTP, okay, anybody can access our server, but SSH, only my IP address can connect to this server, right? So this is where Greg's question goes to this aspect, right? So what Greg is saying is, I don't have a static IP address. What should I specify here, right? So the only way you can do this is, even though you don't have a static IP address, you do have a public IP address, right? So what you do is you can say You can just Google what is my IP, right? And Google's web server will detect your IP address and to give you the IP address that you currently have, right? The IP address that you have at the moment. Now this may change, as you say, right? Because you don't have a static IP address, this IP address may change. Normally, it changes. Maybe if you reboot your router, it will change, right? And also, the ISPs will have a lease time, which normally they keep it for maybe a week or longer, right? At least in my case, right? At least in my case, it's pretty long. The IP address doesn't change unless I reboot my router, right? So you can use whatever IP you have currently in the security group settings. If this changes, unfortunately, there's no other way but to go into the security group and change the IP address, right? So you can basically edit the security group and then change this. Simply do this once again. Maybe change it to anywhere, and then again select my IP address. It will pick up whatever IP that you have at the moment, and it'll specify it here, right? So this is a change that you have to make whenever your IP address changes. All right. So basically, yeah, this is a common problem, right? By the way, all these IP, these are IPv4 addresses. They are very scarce, right? So people, public IP addresses are scarce, and it's a common thing for most companies, most individuals at home don't have static IP addresses, right? So what you do is you can even though you don't have static IP, even though you don't have static IP, you do have a public IP, right, leased to you at any given time, right? So use that in the source IP field in the security group, right? And if it changes, you have to change the security group. All right, okay. And then Greg, your question is said an AWS console similar to VMware? Yeah, so the AWS console is the one that this one right here what you're seeing on the screen is the AWS console, right? And when you launch instances, you are essentially doing what you would do on a VM console, I guess, right? I'm not very familiar actually with VMware, but my guess is using the console you can set up one server of this size, another server of that size, right? So that's what you're doing here. From this console, you can launch whatever types of instances that you need. Right? Or maybe I've misunderstood your question. If yes, you can clarify, right? But once you create your AWS free tier account, you can access to your AWS management console. All right. Okay. So maybe what you're saying is, how do I connect, right? How do I connect to a server, and can I connect the virtual machine out of band? There is an option here. If you go to this server here, so this is the Linux Ubuntu machine, and there's an option here, right? So what you do is, if you click on this, there is a Java SSH client directly, which is available in the browser. Right? Some of the browsers, I think it's not available in Chrome right now, but maybe there's an SSH client built into the server. But otherwise, I don't see any way of connecting. There is a log file. I think there's a log that you can see. This one here, get system log, right? So you can look at the log file without connecting to the server, but otherwise I don't see any other way any other way of connecting to a Linux instance, right? On Windows, you can connect using RDP protocol, which I'll show you now, right? So Windows, you connect differently, but otherwise, I don't see any other way, right? I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with VMware too much, so I'm not sure what exactly you mean when you say connecting to it out of band, right? Well, let me just write what I know here. Basically, from the AWS console, you can use an inbuilt browser plugin SSH client. That's one way, and you can access some you can access some system logs as well, right? And for Windows machines, you connect using the RDP protocol, right, which I'll show you. Okay, and what you're saying here is you might do this if there's an issue with the network settings on the virtual machine. Yeah, so I guess I guess VM is different because you're already on the server, right? You're physically close to the server, but here because it's the servers you're remotely connecting essentially, right? So you do need network access. I don't think you can connect any other way except using SSH. All right. Okay, folks. So let me show you some other stuff here. But before that, let's also look at these questions here. So just to review, right? So the question here is you need to create an army for a customer, and this army is not part of the armies that are available via the AWS console. So what are the alternative? What are the ways in which you can create an army, basically, right? So the options are you can purchase an army or create an army of your own, right? You can purchase it from a third party, but cannot create your own army, right? You have to go to AWS to request them to create an army for you, right? Or you just have to wait. Right? So these are some of the options that are available. Let me know what you think, right? And I think all of you, you're saying Ratish, Greg, Suryakant, all of you are saying A, and that's right, right? That's actually the case. The main point is, you can create your own army, right? That's the main point. So what you can do is you can start with any army, say an Ubuntu server or a Windows server, and then you can install your software packages, application configuration, and once a server is ready, right, you can easily create an army from that server, right? So in fact, let me show this to you. So for example, here, let's say this is our Ubuntu instance, right? We connect to it using SSH, right, in this fashion, and once we are connected, we can basically install stuff here, right? So I could use the package manager apt-get to, let's say, install Apache, right? And also I can install my application, etc. Right? Once this is done, right? Let's say we've installed our stuff on this server, and once that is done, what you can do is simply select that server and create image, right? So this command will create an army which has your application, your software baked into it, right? So this is the main thing, that you can create your own armies. You will be doing that quite often, right? So that's the what the question is about. All right, now this one here, when you launch a virtual machine on EC2, what is that virtual machine called, right? It should be pretty simple. Okay, so many of you are saying B, right? And that's also correct, right? So this is basically sometimes there's confusion. People think Army is a server, right? Army is not a server. It's simply a template, right? It's simply a template, and when you launch a machine, a virtual machine, it's a virtual server, and it's called an EC2 instance, right? It's called an EC2 instance. It can be a spot instance as well, right? It can be a spot instance, but that's if you choose the purchasing option of spot instances, right? Therefore, the option B is better, right? Even though C can be also a potential answer here. All right, so this is something we've not spoken about, right? So let me just show this to you a little bit. So here, the question is about dedicated host and dedicated instances, and what happens is, especially in VPCs, in virtual private cloud, when you launch an EC2 instance, you have an option of using shared instances or using dedicated instances or hosts. There are actually two options within the dedicated category, right? So especially those who need to have private cloud capabilities, right? So there are many industries like banks where the regulator may demand that your servers, your data should be on dedicated infrastructure, right? So in those cases, you may choose to use either a dedicated instance or a dedicated host instead of shared tenancy, right? So that's what this is, and I can show you. Once we do this question, I'll show you where you can make the selection, right? But and also remember that dedicated instances and dedicated hosts will be more expensive because there's no sharing, right? Okay, and this question talks about what's the difference between these two options. There's a dedicated host and a dedicated instance. Right. So a host here, option A says dedicated host is simply the instance is served is a single machine, right? The whole host is yours. The whole machine is yours. Dedicated instance simply means the instance is accessed by a single entity, single customer. Right. So that's option one. Host is accessed by a single customer. Instance means a single machine. That's the reverse of the option A. Right, and then there's other variations of the same theme. Host is single machine. However, dedicated instance means that instance is accessed by multiple customers. Right. So this is a bit confusing, right? This is a bit confusing. The actual answer is A. And essentially what happens is, in a dedicated host, the whole physical machine is yours, right? And in a dedicated instance, also, your EC2 instances are running on a dedicated host, right? However, with a dedicated host, you get to choose which particular host will be used by your instances, right? So there are some licensing issues. Sometimes certain licenses are issued at a host level. So there are some use cases where dedicated host makes sense, right? But most people would be happy with the dedicated instance option, right? So you can look up the documentation and look at the finer aspects of these options here, right? But the major difference is in shared tenancy versus dedicated tenancy, right? So when you launch an EC2 instance, for example, here, when we launch an EC2 instance, in the second page, in this page here, right, you can see there's an option at the bottom for tenancy, right? And here you can choose either shared, which is the default option, or you can choose some of the one of these two, dedicated or dedicated host. All right. Okay. All right. Now let me show you. Another demonstration where we look at how to launch an EC2 Windows instance. Right. So I'm going to just show you how to launch an instance and how to connect to it, right? I'm actually not very familiar with Windows. I'm mostly used Linux in my work, but I'll show you how to launch and connect as well, because many of you, I'm sure, are more comfortable with Windows servers, right? So we need to get this out of the way as well. All right. Now, in the meantime, I think it's about an hour into our session at the moment. So let's take a small break. I think it's a good idea to have maybe a 5-minute break every hour. So let's come back. Let's come back at it's 9:35 p.m. India time. So let's come back at 9:40 p.m. India time. Right. So exactly 5 minutes from now. All right, and in the meantime, you might want to try, if you're not taking a break, you might want to try connecting to the launching an Ubuntu instance, and you might want to try connecting to it. If you're facing any problems, we can discuss those. All right. Otherwise, I'll see you soon. All right, folks. So let's get started. I hope all of you are back from the break here, right? Okay. So what I was going to show you now is how do we create a Windows instance, and how do we connect to a Windows instance, right? So let me go back to the EC2 dashboard here. And I'm going to do the same steps, right? Same series of steps here. So I'm going to click on Launch Instance. And the only difference here is that I will select an Ubuntu, a Windows Army here, right? So there are multiple options here. For example, this is a base OS, and then there are other options, for example, with SQL Server included, right? But for me, for this demonstration, this is sufficient, right? So I'm going to choose the Windows Server 2016 base Army here, right? And the rest of the steps are similar, quite similar, right? So you have we'll choose micro instance because it is free tier eligible, and we'll skip this page. We'll stay with the default settings, right? And here as well, you have a EBS volume. This is also a root volume, and the size here is larger because Windows needs more space than Linux does, right? So there we had 8 GB volume size. Here we need a slightly bigger volume, which is 30 GB here, right? Okay. Rest of the steps are similar. We can we can use the same security group that we had used the last time, right? So we can reuse the security group. However, we may have to open a port for the RDP connection, right? So we'll have to change the security group later to make sure that RDP connections are allowed, right? Okay, and it says here you need to have port 3389 open in order to be able to connect, right? So we'll go back to the security group and edit it to add this rule. All right, this is the review page. So we have a Windows Server Army, a T2 micro instance type, and we are reusing the security group that we had created previously, right? So we launch the Windows instance in the same way. We'll connect to the Windows instance using the same key pair, right? In Windows, you actually don't connect using the key pair, but you use the private key to get your administrator password, right? So that's how it works. I'll show that to you. All right. So now we have this Windows instance coming up. Right, so we have this Windows instance coming up, and once it is in a running state, in order to connect, what you can do is you can basically there are a couple of options here in the Actions menu here, where you can when you connect, you can basically download a configuration file so that your RDP client can use that configuration file to connect to the Windows server, right? So, so let's just wait for this server to come up, and then I'll show that to you, right? In the meantime, we also need to modify the security group here so that we can connect to the server using RDP, right? So let me just click on this security group here, go to the inbound rules, and let's try and add a rule here which allows RDP, uh, which allows traffic on the RDP port here, right? So this is the port is 3389, and here as well we will say my IP address and not anywhere, right? So I can connect to this Windows server over port 3389 from my computer. All right. Okay. So we have modified the security group. Let's go back to the Windows instance here. I think this is the one, and now if you go to the actions, you can see there's a connect option available here, right? So let me just click on this one, and there are two things here. One is you can download a remote desktop file. This is a configuration file, right? It has information like IP address, right? So you can use this configuration file and use the RDP client that you have on your computer, right? The second bit is that you need to get your password, right? You need to get your password using your private key, right? So the private key that was specified when launching the instance has to be used to be able to get your password, right? So there are two steps. So let me go ahead and download the RDP remote desktop file first. All right, so the file is available with me here. Now let me click on get password, right? So when I click on get password, it says you have to wait for at least 4 minutes, after launching an instance before trying to retrieve the auto-generated password, right? So what I've done is I have another Windows machine here. We can use that because it has been running for a while now. We should be able to get the password from that machine, right? So let me just select another one here. Yeah, so this is a Windows server which I had launched before we started this session. So here, let me go back to connect, right? And let me download the remote desktop file for this server, right? And in this case, I can click on get password, and it will show me this screen here, where what I need to do is I need to specify the private key. And once I do that successfully, I can click on this button, decrypt password, and get the password that I can use to connect to the server, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to choose, and this file, this is the private key that is configured with this server, right? And the private key was specified when we launched the server, right? So the name of the key is demokey.pem. Let me select that here, right? As soon as I do that, the private key, right? This stuff here that you see here is the private key, right? You can also actually open this demokey.pem file and copy the private key from there and then paste it in this box, right? Or you can click on choose file and select your private key file. So basically it needs to know your private key, right? And then using the private key, you can decrypt your password, and you can see the password is now available, right? So this is the password that we can use to connect to the Windows server. The default username is administrator, right? Okay. Now on a Mac, to connect to a Windows machine, you need an app, right? And this app is called the Microsoft Remote Desktop app, which I have installed using the App Store, right? Using the App Store. Now, if you're on a Windows machine, you may have to download the remote desktop application, or most likely you'll have this pre-installed, right? You'll have this pre-installed on a Windows client, right? Okay, so this client is needed. Now, what we need to do to connect now, we have this password, right? We have this password. Let me just make sure that I have copied this, and then what I do on a Mac is simply click on this configuration file that we had downloaded in the previous step, right? So just click on this configuration file, and what will happen is the RDP client will start connecting, right? It will start connecting to the server. So I hope you can see this, right? I hope you can see this. Let me see if I can. Let me see if I can get out of the full screen, right? Let me just. Yeah, I hope you can see this. So basically, I'm being asked to enter the password. So I've just pasted the password here, and then I click on OK, and hopefully the RDP connection will go through now. All right, so yes, so the connection is successful. You can see this is the Windows server, right? We have successfully connected to it. You can see the menu, the standard Windows server menu options are available as well. All right, okay, so this is how you launch a Windows instance, and then this is how you connect to the Windows instance using the remote desktop client, right? Remember that you have to make sure that your security group allows access on the RDP port. All right, okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to quit the Microsoft Remote Desktop here, and we are back to our AWS console here. All right. Okay. So good, right? This is hopefully this is good progress. Hopefully you can also try this on your own, right? Um, um, uh, as soon as possible, right? And then this will get you started with EC2. This will get you started with AWS. All right. Now I'm going to show you some more stuff. Right. I'm going to show you one more demo, which is how do we deploy WordPress, right? And I'm going to show this to you on Linux because I'm more familiar with Linux, right? But if you're more of a Windows person, you can try installing WordPress on Windows as well. There's lots of documentation available on the internet, right, on how to do it. It's not hard. WordPress, it's so popular, and they've made the installation, WordPress installation, so simple that I'm pretty sure you'll be able to do it once you connect to the Windows server, right? But let me show you how to do this on a Linux server, and essentially my goal is to show you how an application can be deployed on an EC2 instance, and then once we have the application running, how do we access the application, right? How do we connect to the application over HTTP port? What if we want to use a domain, right? We want to use myproduct.com or mycompany.com domain, right? How do we link up the domain with the EC2 instance? What IP addresses will we use to access the application, right? Those are the kinds of things that I want to show you after I have deployed this application on a Linux instance, right? So let me show this to you, and then we'll talk more about IP addressing and other stuff. All right, so I have 3 servers here. I think 2 of these are Windows. Let me just look these up. So this one is a Windows server, and this one is an Ubuntu Linux machine, because I can make out by looking at the ARMY here, right? This is an Ubuntu server here. So I'm going to connect to this server, and I want to deploy WordPress on this server, right? So what I'm going to do is I'll copy the public IP address here, and I'm going to connect to this server via SSH. Right? Okay. Now I don't exactly remember how to install WordPress, so I'm going to just do a quick. I'm going to find some resource to give me the steps here, right? So AWS installing WordPress on Linux, let's say, right? So if you just do a search like this, you can see there's a tutorial here. Let me use this tutorial as a guide for my installation, right? So you can do the same. You can also find equivalent material for Windows servers as well. All right, so I'll just copy some commands here, right? I'll just follow these steps here. So the first step is to essentially copy the WordPress software onto the server here, right? So let me just, this is the server, right? This is the Ubuntu server. So I'm going to just use the wget command. This downloads the tar file. This is an archive file, and this has the latest version of WordPress, right? So we're just copying the tar file onto this server, right? Yeah, so that's done. Next step is to untar this file, right? So that essentially we are extracting the files from this archive, and now you can see the extraction is complete, and we have a folder here called WordPress, and we can actually change directory and go into this folder. And if you do an ls, right, which is listing the contents of this folder, you can see the WordPress PHP files here, right? So WordPress is a PHP application, and all these files are available here, right? Okay, so far so good, right? So far so good. Now what we need for WordPress is we need MySQL, right? WordPress is a LAMP or a WAMP application, which means it needs Apache MySQL PHP, right? And this can be on Linux or on Windows. So we need a MySQL server first. And if you try to connect to MySQL, let's try and connect to MySQL, and let's see what happens here. Let's try and connect to MySQL, and you can see here on Linux, Linux is more modular, right? Linux is more modular compared to Windows, and what you do on Linux is once you have the operating system, you can then install whatever packages you want, right? So we don't have MySQL installed here already, so we need to install that, right? We need to install MySQL before we can create the WordPress database, right? So what I'm going to do here is let me use the package manager. So in Ubuntu, there's a package manager called apt-get, right? And the package manager basically can install software. It can track the dependencies of that particular software and install those dependencies as well, right? It makes sure that the right versions are being installed. So it does a lot of work, a lot of automation. So we'll use a package manager to install some software, right? And we need to install a bunch of software, including Apache, PHP. We also need MySQL Server, of course, right? So let me go ahead and do that. So I'm going to do apt-get update first. This is to update the repository listings so that we know what are the latest packages available, right? And this is, Linux stuff. If you're not very familiar with Linux, don't worry, right? Don't worry too much about this. Basically, the idea is we are seeing how to deploy an application on this server. Okay, so I'm going to now use the command apt-get install to install a bunch of software packages. So one is Apache 2, which is a web server. 2, I'm going to install PHP 5, which is because WordPress is a PHP application, we need to install this package as well. And also I will install MySQL Server, which is the MySQL server package, right? So we'll install these 3 packages. There may be other stuff that we need, but we'll come to that later, right? So I'm going to just install these 3 packages. All right. Now, when you're installing MySQL Server, you need to set up the root password, right? So let me just set up the root password here. This is the MySQL root password, right? So we'll set up the password, and after this installation, we'll be able to connect to MySQL using that password. All right. Okay. So now, almost there. And yes, so the installation is now complete. We have a bunch of software now installed on the server, right, including Apache, PHP, and MySQL, right? Now, let me go back to the tutorial. Let's see what we have to do with MySQL. So first, we'll have to connect, right? We'll have to connect to MySQL because we'll have to create the WordPress database. We'll have to create some user, a WordPress user as well. First, let me just connect to MySQL here. All right. Okay. So that's it, right? We're now in the MySQL database. This is the MySQL prompt here, right? And let me just follow the tutorial here. I'm just going to copy and paste these commands. This command is essentially creating a MySQL user for the WordPress application, right? So this is just a command for creating a WordPress user. All right, next step is to create a database called WordPress DB. Let me just copy this command and paste it here. All right, and then granting permissions, right? So we're granting permissions to this WordPress user on this WordPress database, right? So this WordPress user will be able to manipulate this database. All right, okay, and then this is just a standard command, flush privileges, which means essentially, flush the, I guess the memory, the cache, so that these new permissions are available to any application, right? And then exit from MySQL, right? So what we've done so far on the server is we've installed some software packages using a package manager, and then we have connected to the MySQL database, and we've created a WordPress database, a WordPress user, and we've granted some permissions, right? Okay, next step, as we'll just follow this tutorial here, right? So the next step is to create a configuration file for WordPress, right? This is a configuration file for WordPress. All right, so what we need to do is we'll copy a sample configuration file, and then we'll create this wp config PHP file. And in this configuration file, we'll have to enter the name of the database, the name of the WordPress user, and also some other stuff. Right. So let me just copy this. Let me just follow these steps here. Okay, so this is just to create the configuration file here, and then we can edit this file using the VI editor. Right? VI is an editor in the Linux environment. There are other editors as well, for example, Nano, which is perhaps more user friendly, right? And now in this configuration file, there's a bunch of stuff we need to change. So things like the database name, the database user, the database password, etc. Right? So we'll have to make these changes. Let me just edit the database name first. Okay, so the database name was WordPress DB. Let's copy this and paste here. Right, and then the MySQL, the WordPress username for MySQL has to be specified, and that is WordPress user. All right, and then the MySQL password of this user, I'm just using default values here, right? Obviously, this is not a great password. You should change this. You should not use this, but just to make sure we are moving along smoothly, right? We'll just use the default values here, right? So 3 main configuration items have been set: the WordPress database, the WordPress user, and the password of that WordPress user, right? Now WordPress also needs a bunch of other things which are related to cookie security, etc., right? So we need to define these things. And if you look at this tutorial, the way you can do this is there's a URL here you just go to this URL, and it gives you these values. It basically creates, this page creates these values for you and gives it to you in a nice page like this. Right? So you can just copy this stuff from this page here, and then you can go back to your configuration file and simply paste these values. Right? So we've pasted these values. I'm going to just delete this stuff here. We don't need this anymore. Right, and that's it. Right, that's our WordPress configuration complete. This is complete. All right, but there's more stuff. We need to, the installation is not complete. We've done the configuration. Now, what we need to do is we need to set up the WordPress installation, configure it with the Apache web server. Right. So this actually, at this point, this tutorial is not very good because it's a general tutorial for Linux, not for Ubuntu. So I'm going to look at another tutorial. I think this was from DigitalOcean, which is a competitor to AWS. Let me just see if there's a good tutorial there. All right. So this one here, right? This one here is what I want to use. So sometimes you have to do this, right? You have to look at multiple resources to accomplish the work. So most of it is very similar, right? Most of it is very similar. What I'm going to do is there's a bunch of commands here which are not in that other tutorial, right? So we'll probably need these things at some point. But let me go past the configuration steps, and we are at the copy file step here, right? So what I'm going to do is I want to copy all the contents in the WordPress folder into the Apache document root, right? So Apache document root simply means the folder, the document root folder of the Apache web server. If we copy everything into this document root, then we'll be able to access WordPress from the browser, right? So let me run this command here. All right, so this is copying everything into the Apache root folder, right? This is rsync. Rsync is basically a way to sync up two folders. All right, okay, so far so good. I think now what should happen is if we were to go to the public IP address of the EC2 instance, we should see WordPress admin page, right? So let me just try this. Maybe something is missing, but let's give this a try. Okay, so this is the public IP address, and let me just go here on the browser. Let me go to the public IP address, and you can see here that I get something, right? This is the Apache default page, right? I'm not seeing WordPress here. I'm not seeing WordPress here, right? I should be seeing WordPress. So the problem is that we need to change the Apache configuration, right? So if I were to go to the Apache configuration file here, right? What we need is a new directive to specify that the homepage of the Apache document root should be index.php, right? This is the this is the WordPress file, right? Right now the directory index is index.html. That's why we are seeing this page here, which is an HTML page, right? So this change should solve our problem, and I'm just going to save this, and I will restart Apache. Right, and now let's see what happens. All right, something has changed, right? Something has changed. We now have the PHP application responding, but there's something missing. It says your PHP installation appears to be missing the MySQL extension which is required by WordPress, right? So something is missing, some software package is missing. So let me just copy this and do a Google search on this problem, and hopefully we'll get a solution, right? This is the great thing about the internet, right? Any problem you have, simply do a Google on that, and there's somebody else who has very helpfully given a solution, right? So I think this is the solution. We're missing a little software package here. Let me copy this and try this out. Right, so we're basically installing this package, PHP5 MySQL ND -ms. Right, that's done. Maybe we need to install Apache. I'm just restarting the Apache web server, and that's done. And hopefully now this will work. Right, so you can see here we do have the Apache installation page here. You can set this up something like my blog maybe, right? Let's say username is admin. This is the password here. You can specify your email ID here, and let me copy this, save it somewhere. All right, okay, and let's click on install WordPress. And that's it, right? This is your WordPress site. Let me just try and log in just to make sure everything is fine here. All right, so this is your WordPress admin page, right? So where you can customize your WordPress site, you can change the theme, you can set up your posts, etc. Right? So we are done. Basically, we are done, right? And this is how we install or deploy an application on an EC2 instance, right? And let me just summarize the stuff that we did. Right? What we did is once we connected, we used the public IP address to connect to the EC2 instance. Right, and then we installed the WordPress. We copied the WordPress application onto the server. We untarred it. Right, we basically extracted the archive, and we saw that there were PHP pages. Right, and we copied those pages into the Apache document root. We also had to install some software. In the Linux world, you need to install packages, right? And you use a package manager. In Ubuntu, we use apt-get. In Red Hat, you use something called Yum, right? So there are different package managers, and these package managers install the software and their dependencies, right? So we used apt-get to install Apache Web Server, PHP5, MySQL Server, and some other packages. And we configured MySQL Server, so we created a database, a user for WordPress, for the WordPress application. Right, and then these MySQL database name, username, etc. were configured in the WordPress configuration file. Right, so that's how we have set up the WordPress application. You can see it is now. It took maybe 10 minutes. Right, it's not that hard, and now we have WordPress running on our EC2 instance here. Right, okay. Now the point is, we've seen this, right? We've seen this. And the point is, how do we access this? How do we access this WordPress application, right? So we'll see that next. We'll see that next. Essentially, the question is, you want your own domain, right? yourproduct.com, yourcompany.com. How do we connect the domain to the EC2 instance so that you can access your WordPress application, right? So we'll learn that next. But let me stop here for the moment. Maybe you have some questions on what you've seen so far, right? Especially the WordPress application, and also maybe the demo where we connected to a Windows instance. All right, so let me know. Let me know if you have any questions on what you've seen so far. If you want me to repeat something, that's fine too, right? I can show you the WordPress installation once again, or some parts of that once again. Please feel free, right? Let's make sure that you understand this fully. And you're able to replicate this at least, right? when you practice on your own. All right. Okay, so Suryakant, what you're saying is, can you redo? Can you show the WordPress installation steps once again, right? Yeah, sure. So so what I'm going to do is, all right, maybe I'll need a new server, right? So that's okay. Let's create a new server, right? So I'm going to create a new server. Once again, we use the Ubuntu. We use the Ubuntu trusty, right? So this is an older version where I know these commands work, right? So I'm going to pick out the older Ubuntu version here called trusty, and first of all, we'll have to launch this EC2 instance here, right? So this is Ubuntu, this is T2 Micro. We'll use the same security group, right, that we've been using, which is the this one here, my app web server, right? So we use the same security group here, and we use the same key pair as well. All right, so now this server is coming up, right? This will have a public IP address of its own, right? So we'll use this public IP address to connect to the Ubuntu server, right? Once we connect, we'll install WordPress. Okay, my session here has timed out, so let me open a new terminal window, and we'll connect to this server from here. All right, so let me try this again. The server is still coming up, right? So that's why you see this connection refused. But let me try this once again. It should work now. All right, any moment now. There's a little bit of a delay because the server is still in the process of coming up, right? So now we have successfully connected, right? So this is the Ubuntu server here, right? This is the Ubuntu server here. Okay, now the question is, how do we install WordPress, right? How do we install WordPress? So we can use some tutorial somewhere, right? Maybe we can use this one. Maybe we can use the other one, right? I think I'll just follow what has worked before for me. So let me first start with the AWS tutorial. Right, so this tutorial talks about first downloading WordPress, right? So we download WordPress first using wget, right? And then we untar, essentially extract the archive file, right? And now we have this WordPress folder with the application, right? This is your WordPress application. We've done nothing so far, right? We've just downloaded and extracted the archive, right? So far. Okay, next we need MySQL. We need to create a WordPress user, WordPress database, etc. But we can't connect to MySQL because on this server, on this Ubuntu instance, we don't yet have the MySQL server package, right? We don't have the software. And we also don't have the Apache web server. We also don't have PHP 5, etc. Right? So we need to install that. So the way we install that is we use a package manager on Ubuntu. On other Linux distributions, you have other package managers, right? But on Ubuntu Debian, we use a package manager called apt-get, right? And the first step before installing is to do an update so that you have the latest information about what are the packages available in the repository, the online repositories, right? So the package manager actually downloads the software from the online repositories, right? So the update command essentially downloads the listing of the various packages and the versions that are available online, right? Okay. Okay, now once we do apt-get update, we can then do apt-get install, and we can list all the packages that we want, right? So we want Apache 2, we want PHP 5, we want MySQL Server, and there's also one more, right? We'll install that later. But these are the main packages for WordPress. All right, and we set up the password of the MySQL root user. This is, part of the installation process, right? The MySQL root user has to be created. All right, this process is very simple in Ubuntu, right? This process can be a little more difficult in other Linux distributions, right? In Ubuntu, they work hard at making things easier, right? So there's not much configuration. Just install it, and you find that Apache comes up on its own, MySQL comes up on its own, right? All right, so that's it, right? We are almost done here, and the packages are installed, right? Okay, then we need to now connect to MySQL and set up our WordPress database and user. So what we do here is we connect to MySQL here. This is the MySQL prompt here, right? And now I'm just going to copy these commands to create the WordPress user, the WordPress database, right? And then this is the command that grants permissions on the database to the WordPress user, right? Okay. Flush privileges basically clears the cache so that you have the latest information in the cache, and that's the MySQL work done. All right. Okay. Let me know if you have any questions so far, right? If you have any questions so far, please let me know. And what we've seen is we've installed the packages, Apache, PHP 5, and MySQL, and then we've configured MySQL, or rather we've connected to MySQL server and created the database user and the permissions for WordPress. All right. Okay. Now, next step is to essentially set up the configuration file here, right? The WordPress configuration file. So what we do is we create the configuration file from a sample here. And this is the configuration file where we need to specify the the WordPress database name, the username, etc. Right? So so this is where you specify the MySQL configuration details, right? So let me just not do everything. Let me just point out the changes that you need to make, right? And then in the same WordPress configuration file, you also need to specify some of these settings. These are basically authentication related keys and what are called salts, right? So it's security related stuff. You can read more about this separately, right? But you can there's a very helpful link here that you can use to generate these values for yourself. Right? So basically, just go here and click on this link, right? And this link will generate whenever you click on this link, it will generate new values, right? So you can simply copy this whole thing and paste it in the configuration file here, right? So that's how you create the WordPress configuration file. Right, and once you've done that, you basically need to copy the WordPress application into the Apache document root folder, right? So that when you go to this server using your browser, right, Apache will serve you the WordPress file, right? So so to copy that, what you can do is you can use the rsync command You can also copy it using other mechanisms, right? But rsync is a good one. And essentially, what we do is we copy all the WordPress files from this folder into the Apache document root, right? So this is how you do an rsync. All right, and that's about it. That's about it. And you also need to make one small change to the Apache Apache configuration, which is you need to add a directory index directive, right? So here you need to add a directory index directive to say that please use the WordPress index.php file as the home as the root file, right? So so basically you say something like this, and it will pick up the WordPress PHP file to be the home page, right? Okay, so these are broadly the steps, right? I hope it's clear. Yeah. All right. All right. Okay. So by the way, these steps will be different for different platforms, right? So obviously Windows will have a different series of steps, and if you use another Linux flavor or distribution, you'll have slightly different steps, right? So you have to pick out the tutorial for the platform that you are using. All right. Okay. Now the question is, we have WordPress, right? We have WordPress installed. How do we access it? How do we make it available to our users, right? So let's discuss this a bit, and then I'll show you how this works. All right, so I'm going to skip this bit a little bit. We'll come back to ENIs at a later point, right? But what I want to show you really is how to use IP addressing, right? How do we use IP addressing? So a server, right? An EC2 instance can have multiple types of IP addresses, right? Especially it has a private IP address, and it can have, or often it does have, a public IP address as well, right? And then on top of that, there is a third type called elastic IP addresses, right? Elastic IP addresses. So it's very important to understand these things, because you need to know what to use when, right? So a private IP address is not mentioned here, but there is that private IP address as well. Right. Okay. Now, what happens is a public IP address is automatically assigned to the instance, right? So when you launch an EC2 instance, a public IP address will be automatically assigned. You can't choose it, right? You can't say this is the IP address I want, right? Whatever is available from the pool of public IP addresses that AWS has, it will issue. They will issue one public IP address to your instance, right? Elastic IP address is also a public IP address, right? The difference is, however, that the elastic IP address is issued to your AWS account, right? It's issued to your AWS account, whereas the public IP address is assigned to a particular EC2 instance, right? And what happens is, if you were to stop your EC2 instance, right, or of course if you were to terminate it as well, the public IP address is released right back to the pool, right, back to the IP address pool that AWS has, right? And if you start the instance after some time, then that old IP address, public IP address, may no longer be available, right? It may be used by someone else. So AWS may issue, in fact, almost always or always, it issues a new public IP address when the server is restarted, right? So this is very important to understand, right? What it means is public IP addresses are volatile, right? They don't remain the same throughout the life cycle of a server, right? So public IP addresses can change essentially, and therefore you can't use public IP addresses in your DNS record sets, right? So never point your domain name yourproduct.com, yourcompany.com, don't point those domain names to a public IP address, because public IP addresses can change. Right? This is very important to understand. If you don't, what will happen is your application will run fine for some time, and then maybe you have to apply some patches. You restart your server, and then your users will start complaining that your site is not really working, right? And what has happened is your public IP address has changed, and your domain name is pointing to an older public IP address, right? So this kind of problem can happen. So what you need to do is, if you want something permanent, then use elastic IP addresses, because the elastic IP address is not assigned to any EC2 instance. It is assigned to your account permanently, right? It's permanently assigned to your account, and you can release it if you want, right? Unless you release it, it will always remain with you, right? So because it is permanently assigned to your account, your DNS names should always be pointing to the elastic IP address, right? And the great thing about the elastic IP address is that you can move it from one server to another, right? You can, for example, in the case of a failover, if your server has a hardware problem, you can create another server, right? And then simply move the elastic IP address from the failed server, from the unhealthy server, to the new server, right? This way you don't have to change your DNS name, and your users will fail over smoothly to the new EC2 instance, right? So this is very important to understand the difference between public IP and elastic IP addresses. All right, now elastic IP addresses, there are some important things that you need to know. These are static IPs, and these are public IPs, right? And these are allocated to your account, and they stay with your account unless you release them, right? But these are limited, right? You can only have 5 IP addresses per region, right? Only 5 per region, simply because these these public IP addresses are so scarce, right? The world is running out of these IP addresses, so they have to limit the IP addresses per region and per account, right? Okay, one important thing: if you don't use the elastic IP, right, then there is a cost, right? And remember, if you don't use it, then there's a cost, right? If you use it, then there's no cost. And basically, the reason for that is they don't want people to hoard elastic IP addresses, right? So they've introduced a little bit of a disincentive, right? There's a little bit of a penalty for hoarding elastic IP addresses. So there'll be a small cost if you are not using elastic IP addresses, right? And when we say not using, what it means is you must associate the elastic IP to a server, right? If you have associated the elastic IP to a server, then there's no cost. All right. Okay. So this is important. All right. Okay. Let me show this to you. Right. It's better that I show this to you. Let's take a look at elastic IP addresses, and we'll also see how to set up a domain name record set pointing a domain to the elastic IP address. Right, let's take a look at this. All right. So what we have here is we have this server, right? We have this server. In fact, I think the server with WordPress. Let me just find that one. All right, so this is the server, right? This is the server on which we have installed WordPress fully, right? And you can see there's a private IP address, there's a public IP address, and right now there's no elastic IP address, right? There's no elastic IP address. So if you want to access the WordPress website, you would go to the public IP address, right? If you did, you would see your WordPress site like this. Right? But of course, for your users, for the end users, right, you don't want an IP address, you want a proper domain, right? You want a proper domain. So let's take a look at how do we configure the domain and how do we point it to the IP address of the EC2 instance, right? Now we'll talk about elastic IPs, but before that, let's take a look at how do we configure the DNS record set. Okay, so I'm going to show you a new service now, right? So there's a service called Route 53, right? Route 53. This is a DNS service from AWS, right? You don't have to use this. It's you can use something else. For example, if you buy domains from GoDaddy.com, right? This is a domain registrar company. There's also another company called Enorm, right? And I'm sure there are others as well, right, in different parts of the world. For example, in India, you have a company called Big Rock, right? So whoever your domain registrar is, the company from where you have bought your domain, right? They also provide you ways of setting up your DNS record sets, right? So Route 53 is something similar. It is something similar to the DNS services that those companies offer, right? So it's not mandatory. It's not mandatory to use Route 53. Right. However, in many for many use cases, it is better. Right. It is better to use Route 53. So let me introduce Route 53 to you, and then we'll discuss this in another module as well. All right. So what you do is from here you can buy a domain. Right. You can buy a domain, whatever your product, your company, those domains, if available, can be bought from Route 53 as well. Right, but even if you have not bought the domain from here, right, if you bought the domain elsewhere, you can also set up those domains to be managed from Route 53, right? So what you do is you basically create a hosted zone. You have to create a hosted zone, set up your domain name here, and create a hosted zone, right? Remember, you must buy the domain, right? You can't set up any hosted zone, right? The domain must be in your control. You must buy a domain before using Route 53, right? Okay, now I've got a hosted zone here. This is just a domain that I happen to own, right? There's please don't ascribe any meaning to this. It's just a domain that I happen to own, and I'm using it for demonstration purposes here, right? So this is just a demo domain. Right. So basically, when you click on that hosted zone, you get this this kind of record sets here, and then you can create your new record sets as well. Right. So let me just delete a few here and then show you how this is done. All right. So let's say you want to create a record set, a DNS record set for your WordPress application. Right? So maybe your domain name is called WordPress dot whatever your domain, right? WordPress.yourdomain.com, right? So this is your domain, and you can point this to the IP address, right? You can point it to the IP address of your EC2 instance, right? So here, right now, we have the public IP address. Let me just copy this and paste it here. Let me copy this and paste it here, right? And that's it. You basically can create your DNS record set, pointing your domain to the public IP address of your EC2 instance, right? So just create this record, and now instead of using this IP address, you can use your domain name, right? You can use a domain name like this, which is obviously much better from a user's point of view. Right, you can see this will work. Let me share this with you. You can try this from your browser as well. Right, it may not work for some of you because what happens is DNS records can take some time to propagate. Right, so depending on your location, it may not work right away for you, but give it a few minutes and it should work. All right. Okay. I think let's take a break. We are at the 2nd hour mark, so let's take a break here. 5 minutes once again. So let us come back. Let's come back at 10:45 p.m. IST. All right. In the meantime, feel free, right? Feel free to try out some of the stuff that you've seen, or if you want to ask some questions, please feel free to enter them in this sheet, right? Otherwise, I'll see you soon in 5 minutes. All right, folks. So let's get started. This will be the last section today, right? So we have about 45 more minutes, and we're discussing IP addressing for these EC2 instances, right? And we've seen just now how to configure a DNS record set where you can point your DNS name to the public IP address of the EC2 instance, right? Let me answer this question from Greg. Is AWS addressing, is it all IPv4, right? In other words, is there any IPv6 addressing possible, right? So the answer is, they've been talking about IPv6 support for a while now, right? And let me just check, it helps to follow the AWS announcements, right? So you can subscribe to AWS announcements so that you are aware of what's happening. But let me just check what they're saying about IPv6 at the moment. Yeah, so you can see here, I think there is IPv6 support for one service, right? Amazon S3, and judging by this forum post, right? It looks like V6 is not available for EC2 instances at the moment, right? So you can see here. This is a bit dated though. It's as of 2014, but I think it's still not available. Right? It's not available for EC2 at the moment. We can also, you can check here. If you look at any of these instances, right? You can see there's only IPv4 that's visible. There's no IPv6 visible in the details panel for these instances, right? So basically, the answer at the moment is IPv6 support for is available for S3 service, right? S3 alone. No support at this time for EC2. All right. Okay. Okay. So what I wanted to show you is, we've seen how this domain name is being used to point to the public IP address, right? And it works. It works. But what may happen? Let's try an experiment, right? Now this is our server here, and what may happen is if you want to stop this, for example, like if you were to stop this server here. Let's see what happens to the public IP address, right? So I'm just going to stop this server. Maybe I'm trying to install some patches on this server, and that's the reason I'm stopping it and restarting, right? So these things happen to servers. So once you stop this server, notice what happens to the public IP address, right? It should go away because AWS thinks that the server is in a stopped state. You may not use it for a long time, so it will remove that public IP address from from this server and release it back into the pool so that it can be used by someone else, right? So let's just take a look at that. It's any moment now, right? It usually takes a few, maybe half a minute for the server to go into the stopped state. All right. So now you can see it's in a stopped state, and then when that happens, you can see the public IP address is now gone. Right? It's been given back to the AWS pool. It's no longer associated with this server at this moment. Right? The private IP address remains the same. So this is something good. The private IP addresses, by the way, you can use for communication between servers, right? So let's say your web server talking to your application server, you can use the private IP address for that, right? So in fact, you should not use public IP addresses for internal or intra-app communication, right? Because what happens is, if you use public IP address, you go out to the internet and come back in, right? So it's always good to use private IP addresses within your stack, right? Within your stack. All right, but the private IP stays, right? It survives server restarts. However, the public IP address is gone. Right? Public IP address is gone. Now, if you want to start this server once again, right? If you want to start this server once again, you will see a new public IP address, right? You can see here there's a new public IP address, and basically, AWS assigns any IP address that is available at that time, right? At that time. So almost always, in fact, always when you restart a server, a new IP address will be assigned, right? Now, obviously, what this means is, if you go to your domain now, right, this will not work, right? This will not work because the IP address on your EC2 instance has changed, right? So this is the problem with the public IP addresses. So what you should do really is you should use elastic IP addresses in these scenarios, right? Right now, there's no elastic IP address associated with this server, right? So what you can do is you go to this menu option here on the left side, elastic IP address, and you can allocate a new IP address, right? So when you allocate an IP address, this IP address is allocated to your AWS account, right? It's not assigned to or attached to any particular server. It is just issued to your account as a whole, right? And then you can choose which server to associate this elastic IP address with, right? So that's how it works. So what we'll do now is we'll associate this elastic IP with our WordPress server. I think this one here. The ID is 22A5, right? So what I'll do now is I'll select this elastic IP address. From the actions, I will associate, right? I will associate this address with the server. So there are two actions here. Allocate is simply to request for a new IP address, and then associate is where you connect the IP address to a particular EC2 instance, right? When you associate, okay, you can associate to any of the servers that are running. Now I've forgotten what that instance ID was. Let me go back here. Okay, so this was 22A5. All right, let me now associate this to 22A5, right? So this is our WordPress server, and we are associating this elastic IP with this server, right? Okay, once you do this, you can look at the instance, right? If you look at this instance, you'll find that the elastic IP address shows up in the panel, in the details panel here, right? And when you do that, also what happens is the public IP address that was there is now gone, right? It's now gone because the elastic IP address also is a public IP address, right? Since we have associated an elastic IP address with this server, that public IP address is no longer required and is released back to the pool, right? So that the public IP address is gone. Okay, so this is good. This is better, right? Because we now have an elastic IP address, which is a more permanent IP address, right? And what you should always do is, in your DNS record set, make sure that you have elastic IP addresses and not public IP addresses, right? So I've made a change here. Now I'm pointing the domain to this elastic IP address, which is how it should be. right? As soon as we do that, this should work. Our domain name should work now, right? And if it does not, after a few minutes, it should work. All right, you can try this on your browser as well, right? For some of you, it will work right away. For some of you, it might take a bit of time to work, and this is because DNS record sets can take a bit of time to propagate. And also sometimes, there's local caching, right? So the IP address may be cached in your browser. All right. Okay. So any questions on the IP addressing? Any questions on public IPs, private IPs, elastic IP addresses? Please let me know. All right. Okay. So then let's proceed. Right. Let's proceed. There's some more things that I want to show you. All right. So maybe we'll do a little bit of a quiz here, right? We'll do a little bit of quiz here, and then maybe what we can do is we can do that. The first step of the project, which is to create your EC2 instance. Maybe if you're familiar with Windows, you can create a Windows instance, and then you can try it now, right? And if there's any problem, we can discuss, right? So maybe we should do that. But before that, let's look at some of these questions. Let's make sure you've understood IP addressing a little bit. All right. So the question here is, what happens when an EC2 instance in a VPC, right, with an associated elastic IP is stopped and started? Right. So options are: elastic IP will stay associated with the instance. B, the data on EBS devices will stay untouched, which means the data will be safe, right? We've not covered EBS, but maybe some of you are familiar with this. The ENI, the Elastic Network Interface Connection state, will not change, right? So, maybe you can take a guess here. This is actually a very difficult question, right? And I think this is a question from, is an actual question from the AWS certification examination, right? All right. So Suryakant, you're saying the answer is A, right? Greg, you're saying the answer is D, right? D. All right. Yeah. So this is a very difficult question, and I think Greg, you've got it right. Right. So Suryakant, elastic IP will stay associated with the instance. That is true, right? You're right as well. However, the other options are also true. And let me tell you a little bit about this question, right? And why it's a little complex, tricky question. So what used to happen before VPCs, right? Before VPCs is that if we used to have instances in the public cloud, right? Directly in the public cloud, and there, if the instance restarted, then or if the instance was stopped, then the elastic IP address would get disassociated, right? It would get detached from the EC2 instance, and that's why a lot of people think that the elastic IP continues to exhibit that behavior, right? But in VPCs, only in VPCs, even if the server restarts, the elastic IP address is always associated with the instance, right? So this is one point of confusion that arises, right? And also, this is a difficult question because you may not be familiar with some of these other topics, right? Especially ENIs. People are not familiar with ENIs too much, right? But the hint here for you was that EBS volumes are persistent volumes, right? The whole purpose of EBS is to persist your data, right? So even if the server restarts, the data does not get lost if the data is on EBS volumes, right? And there is another storage type that is available with EC2 instances, and those are called instance store volumes, right? So there's EBS volumes and there is instance store volumes, and what happens is the instance store volumes are not persistent, right? So the data on those volumes is lost when the server restarts, right? And initially, when AWS first came out, there were only instance store volumes, by the way, right? And EBS volumes came later. And this question is basically testing, right, whether you understood what EBS is. It's an old question, actually, right? So maybe it's not as relevant as it used to be in the past, right? But this is definitely true that EBS devices are persistent. The data does not get lost, right? So we know that both A and B are true. So therefore, C must be true, right? Even though maybe you're not very familiar with this option, right? So the right answer is D. All right, let's look at this question as well, right? Each account in AWS is limited to only 5 IP addresses. And what's the reason for that? Right, this is not that hard. Right, so I think the options here are IPv4 addresses are scarce, right? There are only 5 network interfaces per instance. There could be some hardware restrictions. There are some security reasons, right? So yeah, so I think Greg and Suryakant, both of you have it right. It's basically because IPv4 addresses are scarce, right? 5 elastic IP addresses. Yeah, is it per account or is it per region, right? That I think maybe we can check, but the right answer is yes. It's because IPv4 addresses are scarce, right? And they want to place, AWS has lots of these service limits, right? Almost all services have some limits, and the reason is they don't want people to hoard resources, right? They don't want large companies to come in and just sit on a lot of resources, so they have these service limits. Right? In some cases, you can speak to AWS to increase your service limits, right? So there could be a limit, for example, on the number of S3 buckets you can have, right? But maybe you can speak to them and have that limit changed, right? So yeah, so that's a general point about service limits as well. All right. All right, folks. So, why don't we do this? We have about half an hour, right? Why don't you, folks, give this a try, right? Maybe you can launch an EC2 Ubuntu instance, right? Or maybe if you're more comfortable with Windows, launch a Windows instance, right? And then try to set up, right? Try to set up the WordPress application on the server, right? Maybe take the next 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Give this a try, and if you face any problems, let me know, right? Maybe we should do this exercise. It'll be useful to do this activity, right? So how about doing this right now, and then we'll come back in 10 minutes, right? In 10 minutes, maybe a little more time if you need it, and then we can discuss this activity, any problems that you've been facing. All right? Okay. So yeah, so next 10 minutes, 15 minutes, let's try this activity. Set up your Ubuntu instance, set up your Windows instance, try and set up WordPress if at all possible. All right. Okay. So this is a lab right now, right? You can do this activity. Set up Ubuntu or Windows instance and connect to it, right? At the minimum, let's try and do this. And if possible, try installing WordPress. All right, so you can give this a try. I'll be on mute, right? I'll be quiet for some time, and then I'll check in with you after a bit. All right. All right. See you soon. Okay, Suryakant, your question is, do we need to use the trusty version? No, no, not necessary, right? Not necessary. In fact, what I would encourage you to do is to use the Linux distribution that you are most comfortable with, right? And if you're comfortable more with Windows, to use Windows Server, right? You can find documentation on installing WordPress on Windows quite easily on the internet, right? So you can follow your own guide and try it that way. So I don't want you to learn a new OS, right? Just do what you are more comfortable with, right? AWS has no preference, right? AWS has no preference. So I think that's the best way. Yeah. In launching the instance, in connecting to it, please let me know. Right, and if you're not comfortable right now, right, that's okay. You can practice this later as well. And like I said before, you can contact support, right? You can contact Edureka support if you are facing any problems, right? And they will get in touch with me if required. All right, so that's available as well. Yeah, so Greg, what you're saying is launching into Windows, it's a bit slower than Linux to get going. Yeah, that's true. That's true because it's, firstly it's a GUI, right? So so I guess the network latency may be higher, and also maybe the Windows software perhaps needs a lot more memory, and you might be using a micro instance, right? That could be another reason. Maybe it makes sense to use a larger server for Windows, right? I'm not very sure about that, but that could be another reason, I guess. All right. How about the others, right? If you're doing the lab, right, and if you're facing any problems, please let me know. If you want to do this later, please let me know as well, right? We can then discuss maybe some interview questions. Maybe we can look at a quiz, just so that we reinforce what we've learned so far. By the way, folks, let me also point out that there's some additional material available here, right? So especially WordPress blog on a Windows server, right? I think there's a step-by-step guide available here, right? So this in the LMS, right? This is the learning management system, and under module 2, you can see there's this lab document which can be downloaded, right? So this file, this is a PDF file which will have a step-by-step guide to deploying a WordPress application on a Windows server, right? So you can follow this. It has all the steps required to install WordPress. All right. Okay. So maybe let's take a couple of more minutes, right? If there's any questions while you're doing this, right? If you're facing any problems, please let me know. And after that, let's take a look at some of the. We have some additional material. There are some interview questions, some quiz. So maybe we can try those as well before we go today. All right, so Suryakant, your question is, how do we delete the instance, right? How do we delete the instance? And yeah, this is important, right? What happens is the best way to control the cost, right? The best way to control the cost is to make sure that you clean up after you are done, right? There are other ways of cost optimization, things like reserved instances, spot instances, etc. Right? But before that, even more important than that is to make sure that you clean up the instances, right? But deletion is pretty easy. All you have to do is select the server, right? For example, this one here. Just select the server and from the actions, you can go to instance state here, and then click on terminate, right? Click on terminate. You can also stop the server, right? When you stop the instance, you save some cost, right? The instance, the hourly instance rate is not applied when the server is in a stopped state, right? However, when it's in a stopped state, you're still using some storage, right? So the cost of the EBS volumes will still be applied, right? So both these options are available: stop and terminate, right? Terminate will completely remove the server, and there will be no cost at all, right? But stop is also an option sometimes. So you can save some cost by stopping the server, especially if you need the server in a short while again, right? So these options are available, but what you do is terminate, right? Here we can terminate the server in this fashion, and you can also, let me go ahead and terminate all these servers, right? I don't need any of these after this class, so I can select all of these and terminate them together. Right, and some of these have elastic IP addresses associated with them, so you can make sure to select this as well, right, so that the elastic IP address is also released back into the pool, right? If you don't do this, right, if you don't do this and you leave an elastic IP address unassociated, right, your servers have been terminated and the elastic IP address is just sitting there, right, unassociated, then there will be a cost, right? There will be a cost that you'll find in your bill, right? So make sure that the elastic IPs are also cleaned up once you're done, right? So I'm deleting everything, and also the elastic IP addresses are also cleaned up, right? A good way is to go to the dashboard, right? Go to the dashboard, and here you can see what resources are still in use, right? You can see these are 3 volumes, right? But these will go away because the servers are still being terminated, so the volumes should go away soon, right? But if you find something here, then that's a cause for concern. You should go and make sure that you clean. All right. Okay, so that's how you terminate stuff. All right, folks. So let me stop this, this class lab or this class project here, right? If you've not finished, maybe you can practice later, right? And feel free to connect with support if you need help. All right. Okay. Let's take a let's do a little bit of review, right? Let's do a little bit of review. I think what we can do is we can look at this quiz here, right? This is a quiz which is available in the LMS, right? Let's attempt this quiz now, right? We have about 8 more minutes. All right, and I'll ask you to answer these questions, right, using the webinar questions section of your webinar panel. All right, so the first question, right? The first question. This is more about the CLI, the command line interface, right? We've not really seen this too much, but maybe you can give this a try. So in the CLI, what happens is you can run some commands, right? And the commands are the same ones that you run from the web console, right? Except these are from the command line, right? So so the question is, what does the following command do with respect to security groups, right? And the command is EC2 create group or create security group. Yeah. So Greg, what you're saying is the answer is 2 here. So let's select this. I think you're right. It does create a new security group, and always, when you create a group, it's always within your AWS account. Sometimes you can create a security group, which is for a certain VPC, right? But always it is within your account. All right. Next one. When you're doing an SSH to an Amazon EC2 instance, and you get a connection timeout message, right? What could be the reason? Okay, Yella, what you're saying is 3, right? You're saying verify that the private key file is correct, right? You're using the private key that that you selected when launching the EC2 instance. So remember, when we launch the instance, the last step is where we specify the private key file, right? We want to use, and maybe this is the answer. Even I'm not 100% sure. Maybe this is the problem, but I would think if the private key is wrong, right, the error would be would say that there's a problem with the private key file, right? So this looks this I think usually happens when there's a firewall issue, right? So it's not the options are not covering a firewall. So I'm actually not sure what the answer to this is, right? So let me uh, let's select this one, right? But I think it's not 100% right. We'll see later. All right. Let's go to the next one. All right. So this one is, you have a EC2 security group, right? And let's say, and then several EC2 instances are using that security group. You change the rule, right? You change the rule, and then the question is, how quickly do the new rules apply, right? Is it immediately for all instances? Is it immediately for only the new instances, right? Or do some of the servers need to be stopped and restarted? Or maybe there's a lot of there's a lag, right? There's several minutes before the rules are applied, right? So this is the question. Essentially, how quickly are the new rules applied to the servers? Yeah. So Suryakant, you're saying 3. Greg, you're saying 3 as well, but you're not sure, right? And I think it's 1, right? I think it's 1. It applies immediately to all instances because I've seen this in practice, right? You can change a rule and it applies immediately to the existing servers for sure, right? And it is reasonable to assume that new instances will be the same. So I think it's 1. Right? I think it's 1. Let's go with this, and we'll check the solution later. All right. If I want my instance to run on a single tenant hardware, what do we do? Right. This is simple, I think. So yeah. So Greg, you're saying 4, and I think that's the only option which makes sense, right? So dedicated is the right answer, and none of these other options make sense actually for this, right? So there's only dedicated which makes sense in this case. So I think this one is the right one. All right. Let's go to number 5 here. What can you not buy on the AWS marketplace? Yeah, this is perhaps the question is a little bit confusing, right? What can you not buy? You can certainly, perhaps you can buy armies, right? You can buy armies, but when you launch armies, when you use the armies, you actually launch instances. So I'm a little confused. I'm not 100% sure what the right answer is, right? But we'll go with Greg's choice, right? Let's say it is instance, right? So let's assume we buy armies and not instances. Maybe this is the right one. Let's go to the next one. How many elastic IPs by default, or rather, what's the maximum number of elastic IPs that you can have in your AWS account, right? Let's assume that is the question, right? And we have seen this in the slide, yeah. So Greg, you're saying option number 3, which means 5, right? 5 elastic IPs maximum. So let me select this one here. All right. Okay. Is there a cost associated with elastic IP address? If yes, when does that happen? Mukesh, you're saying option 3, right? You're saying when it is allocated and associated with a stopped instance, right? You're saying option 3. Greg, you're saying option 4, costs are incurred regardless of whether the IP is associated with a running instance. No. So what happens is, if it is associated, right, if you're using the elastic IP address, then there is no cost, right? That's for sure. So, but if you're not using it, right, then there's a cost. And the question is, what do we mean by not using it? So maybe 1 is the right option, right? Because you just allocated it, which means it's been issued to you, but you've not really associated it, right, with a server. So this is probably the right answer, because in this case, you're not really using the elastic IP address, right? So this is when you will incur a cost. I think there's an hourly cost, right? The number of hours that you don't associate the server, for those number of hours, they'll be you'll be charged, all right? Okay. All right, if you want to launch an EC2 instance and assign each instance a predetermined private IP address, right, then what should you do, right? This goes into VPCs, right, which we've not really discussed at this moment, but maybe you can give this a try. Yeah, and some of your answers, I'm not seeing them right away, right? So I just saw Suryakant and Mukesh, your responses, I think, to the previous question, right? But all right, to this question, Greg, you're saying 1 or maybe 4, right? 1 or maybe 4. So yeah, so the right answer, right, I think is 1, because in VPCs, a VPC is a virtual private cloud where you get your own private network, right? And when we say private network, what that means is you can decide the IP addressing of your network, right? You can create any sort of IP address range, right? So that's the key thing about private. Oh, I think I ran out of time, right? I think I ran out of time here. All right. So anyways, so what I was trying to say is VPCs are where you have control over the IP addressing, right? So it's likely that the answer to that question was A, right? The VPC response. All right. So anyways, you can try this quiz yourself, right? And you can also look at the solutions, right? You can look at the solutions after you have completed your attempt, right? And we can discuss this later when we meet again the next time. All right. Okay. So we've, I think, crossed our allocated time, right? So we'll end the session here. Thanks very much for joining, right? I hope you'll practice, right? EC2 especially. And next week we'll look at storage and network services. All right. So see you then. See you next Saturday. Bye.